So here is the procedure for Lab 11B. And we're back on our old buddy, the simulator. And the first thing that you're going to do is lock the volume. So make sure that you hit this lock so that the volume can't change. Otherwise, we're going to be testing the wrong set of variables. So that's the first thing. If you want to add more gas, you can. You click on the plunger and it will add more gas to our chamber. And the second thing that you want to do, even if you don't add more gas, is heat this all the way as high as it will go, which is 600 kelvins, and then you can turn it off. So what you're going to do is you're going to obtain 6 different measurements for temperature and pressure. And you can use 600 kelvins as your first if you want. And then I'm going to ask you to cool this 5 times and record the pressure at each. And you can go as low as you want. You can go as slowly as you want. You'll find that it won't go any lower than 10 kelvins. So make sure that you recorded these temperatures and volumes, and we're going to record these in Excel. Now that I have all of my data, I'm going to record it in Excel. And in my first column, I will have my temperature in kelvins, and notice that it is arranged from highest to lowest. In column B, I have put my pressure in atmospheres, also arranged from highest to lowest. In column C, I have taken the inverse of pressure, and I have recorded that in column C as the inverse. And then in column D, I am going to take all of my temperatures that are in kelvins, and I'm going to convert them to Celsius by subtracting 273. And I have arranged them in order from highest to lowest. And after the last value, I have added negative 300. Even though we, A, don't have any data for that one, and B, we know that absolute zero is negative 273 degrees Celsius. That corresponds to 0 degrees Kelvin. So there's no way our data is going to get that low. I'm going to make appropriate graphs for all 3 of these. So the first one is going to be a graph of temperature on the x-axis and pressure on the y. This is going to be a simple scatter chart, so I'm simply going to hit this. And I'm going to put axis titles, and I also have my chart title, so I can make this whatever I want. Temperature versus pressure, and I'm going to label my axes accordingly. This is, of course, temperature in kelvins, and I'll label this one appropriately. This is going to be pressure in atmospheres. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with my if you want to insert a trend line, you can. You just click on the plus and it'll ask for a trend line, and you can if you want, but we're not really going to worry about that one. We're also going to construct a graph of temperature on the x versus the inverse of pressure on the y. You can do that by highlighting everything in column A, then hitting Control, holding it down, and highlighting everything in column C, and we're going to insert a chart, and I'm just going to pick a simple scatter chart, so I'm just going to go right here. It looks like this. Again, we want the proper title. This is going to be temp versus the inverse of pressure. There's only one P in temp. And I can either say inverse pressure, or if I wanted to get fancy, I could say inverse, spell it correctly with an E. I could say pressure and then say to the -1, because that's obviously the nomenclature or notation for inverse. We're going to add axes titles, and make sure that you label your axes with the proper measurement and units. The last graph that we're going to construct is going to be the most important one. So in the last graph, we're going to put pressure on the x-axis, not inverse, just regular pressure. And we're going to put temperature in Celsius on the y, because what we're going to try to do is perform what's called a regression, a linear regression. And we're going to see where our trend line intersects the y-axis, which corresponds to our temperature in Celsius. So we're going to highlight column B first. Then over column D, we're going to hold down Control and highlight everything, including -300, even though we don't have any corresponding data. And we'll insert a scatter chart for this one. Now we're going to make some modifications. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it as big as I can, just because it's a lot easier to see what's going on. Notice that because we have this -300, the graph actually extends below where our data record. We're going to click axes, titles, obviously, and we're going to label these appropriately. Obviously, this time the pressure is now the x-axis in atmospheres. And we're going to do the same thing this time with our temperature in degrees Celsius. All right, so that's that one. But this is the most important part. What we're going to do is we're going to go up to this, we're going to add a trend line. But then we're going to format the trend line. So we're going to hover over the trend line and right click on it, and you'll see that option opens up to format the trend line. We're going to make two modifications. The first is that we're going to go down here to forecast, and we're going to ask the graph to extend this backward 1 period. 1 period means one entire unit. So of course an entire unit is pressure in atmospheres. So it's going to regress this 1 atmosphere. Look what it does. Now it extends 1 whole unit back past the origin. So we can see where our graph intercepts the y-axis, and this corresponds to what our data tells us would be the pressure at 0 kelvins if we were capable of getting there, which in this graph is -273. We're also going to ask the graph to display the equation. And this equation up here shows us the equation for our straight line, and in particular, since this equation is the format for a straight line, y equals mx plus b, y being the corresponding value on the y-axis, m being the slope, x being the corresponding value on the x-axis, and b being the intercept of the y-axis, what we call the y-intercept. And this is what our value would be where our trend line intersects the y-axis at 0 atmospheres, -272.74 degrees Celsius. So please make all these modifications and make sure that you are screenshotting and importing these graphs into your lab report. All right, see you guys later.